The bandage wrapped around Paloma's wrist told a story she desperately wanted to hide. As she balanced 3 plates of pasta arrabbiata on her arm, weaving through the crowded dining room of Bianchi's, Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant, she prayed no one would notice. The white gauze stood out against her olive skin like a beacon, marking her as damaged goods. She'd been working here for 3 weeks, keeping her head down, collecting tips and avoiding attention. The restaurant attracted powerful men, politicians, CEOs and others, whose business dealings happened in whispered conversations over expensive wine. Paloma had learned not to listen, not to look too closely, and definitely not to ask questions. But tonight felt different. The air crackled with tension as servers moved with unusual urgency. Even the kitchen staff seemed on edge, their usual banter replaced by nervous silence. Paloma approached table 7, where a man sat alone, his presence commanding the entire corner of the restaurant. Dark hair, perfectly styled, expensive suit tailored to perfection, and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail around him. She'd served him twice before, always polite, always generous with tips, but there was something about him that made her pulse quicken with a mixture of fear and something else she didn't want to name. Giancarlo Bianchi owned this restaurant. He owned half the block. And if the whispered rumors were true, he owned much more than that. Paloma set the plate of osso buco before Giancarlo Bianchi, her movements practiced and efficient despite the tremor in her hands. She'd perfected the art of invisibility over the past 3 weeks: smile politely, take the order, deliver the food, collect the tip. Don't engage, don't make eye contact longer than necessary. Don't give him any reason to notice her beyond her function as his server. "Your meal, Mr. Bianchi," she said softly, her slight Mexican accent coloring the words despite years of practice. Giancarlo's dark eyes lifted from his phone, and Paloma felt that familiar jolt of awareness that made her want to step back. At 34, he possessed the kind of dangerous magnetism that drew people in while simultaneously warning them away. Tonight he wore a black suit with a white dress shirt, the top buttons undone, revealing the edge of a wolf tattoo on the left side of his neck. The ink seemed to move in the dim restaurant lighting, predatory and alive. "Grazie, Paloma." His voice carried the faintest trace of Italian, smooth as aged whiskey. She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. "What happened to your wrist?" Paloma's blood turned to ice. She'd been so careful, pulling her sleeves down, angling her arm away from customers' view. But somehow he'd noticed. Of course he had. Men like Giancarlo Bianchi didn't miss details. "It's nothing, sir. Just a small accident in the kitchen." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. She'd told it so many times over the years that it almost felt true. Giancarlo's gaze sharpened, and Paloma realized her mistake. She should have deflected, changed the subject, made some excuse about other tables needing attention. Instead, she'd given him an opening, and men like him were experts at exploiting weaknesses. "Show me." His voice carried quiet authority, the kind that made people obey without question. "I really should check on my other—" "Paloma." The way he said her name made her stomach flutter. Not harsh, not demanding, but with an undertone that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being refused. "Sit down." She glanced around the restaurant. The dinner rush was winding down, and her other tables were settled for the moment. Marco, the floor manager, was nowhere to be seen. She had no excuse, no escape route. Reluctantly, she slid into the chair across from Giancarlo, acutely aware that she was crossing a line. Servers didn't sit with customers, especially not with the owner, but something in his expression told her this wasn't a request she could refuse. "Your wrist," he repeated, extending his hand palm up on the white tablecloth. Paloma's heart hammered against her ribs. The last thing she wanted was for anyone to see the evidence of her shame, especially this man whose very presence made her feel exposed and vulnerable. But there was something in his eyes, not pity, not curiosity, but a cold, controlled anger that wasn't directed at her. Slowly, she placed her bandaged wrist in his palm. Giancarlo's fingers were warm against her skin as he gently turned her arm, examining the gauze with the focused attention of someone who understood violence intimately. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands that looked capable of considerable damage. This wasn't caused by kitchen equipment. His voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. Kitchen burns are different. This is from rope or wire. Someone tied you up. Paloma jerked her hand back, but his fingers tightened slightly, not enough to hurt but enough to keep her in place. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts as memories flooded back. Diego's rage, the zip ties cutting into her wrists, the hours of terror before she'd managed to escape. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but her voice shook with the effort of maintaining the lie. Giancarlo's thumb traced the edge of the bandage with infinite care, and Paloma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. When was the last time someone had touched her with gentleness? When had anyone looked at her with concern rather than calculation? "Who hurt you?" The question came out soft but deadly, each word precisely enunciated. Paloma's composure cracked. She'd held it together for 3 weeks, working double shifts, sleeping in a studio apartment that cost more than she could afford, jumping at every shadow. But something about the way Giancarlo asked the question, not if someone had hurt her, but who, broke through her carefully constructed defenses. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. "He can't find me here. I made sure of that." Giancarlo's grip on her wrist tightened fractionally, and Paloma saw something flicker in his dark eyes that made her shiver. "Your boyfriend?" "Ex-boyfriend. I left him. I left everything." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I came to Chicago to start over. I just need to work, save money, and disappear again if I have to." Giancarlo was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still tracing gentle patterns on her skin. Around them, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the clink of silverware against china, but Paloma felt as though they existed in a bubble of tense silence. "What's his name?" Giancarlo's voice had gone completely flat, emotionless in a way that was somehow more terrifying than if he'd shouted. I won't." Paloma tried to pull her hand away again, but this time Giancarlo's grip was firm. "Paloma." He leaned forward slightly, and she caught the scent of his cologne. Expensive, masculine, with hints of bergamot and cedar. "Look at me." Against her better judgment, she raised her eyes to meet his. What she saw there made her breath catch. Fury, yes, but not at her. The kind of cold, calculating rage that promised retribution. "No one hurts what's under my protection," he said quietly. "And as of right now, you're under my protection." Before Paloma could process what he meant, the restaurant's front door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. 3 men in expensive suits strode in, their movements predatory and purposeful. The tallest one, with salt and pepper hair and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, scanned the room until his gaze landed on their table. Well, the scarred man called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent restaurant. "Giancarlo Bianchi, hiding behind his pasta and pretty waitresses." Giancarlo's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The gentleman who'd been examining her wounds disappeared, replaced by something cold and lethal. He released Paloma's wrist and stood slowly, his movements fluid and controlled. "Russo," he said, his voice carrying deadly calm. "You're not welcome here." The scarred man, Russo, smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not here for dinner, Bianchi. I'm here for what you took from me." Paloma's blood turned to ice as she realized she was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than a restaurant dispute. Around the dining room, other customers began to notice the tension, conversations dying as people sensed the shift in atmosphere. "You took nothing that wasn't already mine," Giancarlo replied, his hand moving almost imperceptibly toward the inside of his jacket. Russo's smile widened. "We'll see about that." His gaze shifted to Paloma, still sitting frozen at the table. "Pretty little thing you've got there. Shame if something happened to her." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Giancarlo took a step forward, and Paloma could practically feel the violence radiating from him. "You just made a very big mistake," Giancarlo said softly. The silence stretched taut as a wire about to snap. Paloma's heart pounded so hard, she was certain everyone in the restaurant could hear it. She wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but caught between these 2 dangerous men. But her legs felt like lead, and Giancarlo's presence behind her was both terrifying and oddly comforting. "Did I?" Russo asked, his scarred face twisting into an ugly grin. "Seems to me you're the one who's been making mistakes, Bianchi. Moving into territories that don't belong to you. Taking contracts that were already spoken for." Giancarlo's jaw tightened. "The Torino deal was open to the highest bidder. You lost. Accept it and move on." "Accept it?" Russo laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "You cost me $3 million and made me look weak in front of the commission. You think I'm going to just walk away?" Paloma noticed movement in her peripheral vision. The other diners were quietly gathering their belongings, servers discreetly ushering them toward the back exit. Within minutes the restaurant had emptied, except for Russo's men, a few of Giancarlo's people who had materialized from somewhere, and herself. "The commission ruled in my favor," Giancarlo said, his voice steady. "Take your grievances up with them." "Oh, I intend to." Russo's gaze flicked back to Paloma. "But first, I think we need to discuss compensation for my losses, starting with your little pet here." The words were barely out of Russo's mouth before Giancarlo moved. One moment he was standing calmly beside the table. The next he had crossed the distance between them and had Russo pressed against the wall, a gun appearing in his hand, as if by magic. "You don't get to look at her," Giancarlo snarled, his voice low and deadly. "You don't get to speak about her. You don't even get to think about her. Are we clear?" Russo's men reached for their weapons, but Giancarlo's people were faster. Suddenly the restaurant was full of drawn guns, everyone aimed at someone else in a deadly standoff. "Very protective," Russo wheezed, Giancarlo's forearm pressed against his throat. "Must be special. Tell me, Bianchi, does she know what you really do for a living? Does she know about the bodies you've buried, the families you've destroyed?" Paloma's stomach lurched. She'd suspected, of course. The expensive suits, the deference of the staff, the way people spoke about him in hushed tones. But hearing it said so bluntly made it real in a way that terrified her. "Shut your mouth," Giancarlo growled, pressing harder. "Or what? You'll kill me in front of your girlfriend? Show her exactly what kind of monster she's gotten involved with?" Giancarlo's finger tightened on the trigger, and Paloma saw murder in his eyes. Without thinking, she stood up. "Stop," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Both men turned to look at her, and she felt the weight of every gun in the room. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to take a step forward. "Please," she said, looking directly at Giancarlo. "Don't do this. Not because of me." Something flickered in Giancarlo's dark eyes. For a moment, she thought he might ignore her, might pull the trigger anyway. Then, slowly, he stepped back, though he kept the gun trained on Russo. "You have 30 seconds to get out of my restaurant," Giancarlo said, his voice deadly calm. "If I see you again, if you come near anything or anyone that belongs to me, I will end you, and it won't be quick." Russo straightened his jacket, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "This isn't over, Bianchi." "Yes," Giancarlo said quietly. "It is." Russo and his men backed toward the door, weapons still drawn. Just before they reached the exit, Russo called out, "Ask her about Diego Morales, Bianchi. Ask her why she's really running." The door slammed shut behind them, leaving the restaurant in heavy silence. Paloma felt the blood drain from her face. How did Russo know about Diego? How did he know she was running? Giancarlo turned to look at her, and she saw the exact moment when suspicion crept into his expression. The gentle man who had examined her wounds was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating boss who had just held a gun to another man's throat. "Diego Morales," he repeated slowly. "Want to tell me who that is?" Paloma's mouth went dry. "I don't know how he—" "Don't lie to me." Giancarlo's voice cut through her words like a blade. "I just put my life and my business on the line for you. The least you can do is tell me the truth." Around them, Giancarlo's men were holstering their weapons and checking the restaurant for any signs of trouble. But Paloma felt as though she and Giancarlo were alone in a bubble of tense silence. "Diego is my ex-boyfriend," she said finally, "the one who hurt me. And nothing, I left him. I came here to get away from him." Giancarlo studied her face with the intensity of a man who made his living reading people's lies. What aren't you telling me? Paloma closed her eyes, knowing that the fragile safety she'd built over the past 3 weeks was about to crumble. Diego isn't just my ex-boyfriend. He works for the Morales cartel, in Mexico. The silence that followed was deafening. When Paloma opened her eyes, Giancarlo was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. A cartel princess, he said finally, running from Daddy's business. No, the word exploded out of her. It's not like that. I never wanted any part of that world. I was trying to get out, to build a normal life, but Diego wouldn't let me go. He said I knew too much, that I belonged to him. What do you know? The question hung in the air between them. Paloma realized she was at a crossroads. She could lie, try to minimize her knowledge, and hope Giancarlo would let her disappear into the night. Or she could tell the truth, and trust that the man who had just protected her from Russo would protect her from this too. Everything, she whispered. I know about the routes, the contacts, the money laundering operations. Diego used me as his personal secretary for 2 years. He thought I was too stupid to understand what I was typing, what I was filing. Giancarlo was very still, and now you're here in my city, working in my restaurant with all that information in your head. I never meant for this to happen. I just needed a job, needed to blend in somewhere safe. Safe. Giancarlo laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you have any idea what you've done, what you've brought to my door? Before Paloma could answer, one of Giancarlo's men approached the table. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Boss, he said quietly, we need to talk. Giancarlo nodded curtly. Take her upstairs. Make sure she's comfortable, but don't let her leave. Wait, Paloma said, panic rising in her chest. You can't just... I can do whatever I want, Giancarlo said, his voice flat and cold. You're in my world now, Paloma. And in my world, information like what you possess makes you either a very valuable asset or a very dangerous liability. He leaned down until his face was inches from hers, and she could see the wolf tattoo clearly now, the predator's eyes seeming to stare directly at her. The question is, he said softly, which one are you? The apartment above the restaurant was nothing like Paloma had expected. Instead of the cold industrial space she'd imagined, she found herself in a beautifully appointed living area with exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. It was warm, sophisticated, and surprisingly comfortable. But it was still a prison. The grey-haired man who'd escorted her upstairs, Vincent, he'd introduced himself, had been polite but firm. The doors were locked from the outside, the windows didn't open, and there were men stationed in the hallway. Paloma sat on the leather sofa, her mind racing. How had her carefully constructed new life fallen apart so quickly? 3 hours ago, she'd been worried about making enough tips to cover rent. Now she was being held captive by a man who could have her killed with a phone call. The sound of the lock turning made her jump. Giancarlo entered, carrying a tray with coffee and what looked like homemade tiramisu. He'd changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a black sweater, the casual clothes making him look younger but no less dangerous. You haven't eaten, he said, setting the tray on the coffee table. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. We have a lot to discuss, and I need you thinking clearly. Paloma stared at him, trying to reconcile this version, bringing her food, showing concern for her well-being, with the man who'd held a gun to Russo's throat. Are you going to kill me? Giancarlo poured 2 cups of coffee, his movements precise and controlled. That depends on several factors, such as whether you're telling me the truth, whether Diego Morales is actively looking for you, whether the Morales cartel considers you a threat or an asset. He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. Whether you're willing to cooperate? Paloma wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for something to hold on to. What kind of cooperation? The kind that keeps us both alive. Giancarlo settled into the chair across from her, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Tell me about Diego. Where could she even begin? The charming young man who'd swept her off her feet when she was 19? The gradual transformation, into someone she didn't recognize? The escalating violence that had finally driven her to run? "We met in college," she said finally. "I was studying business administration at Universidad de Guadalajara. He was different then, charming, ambitious, full of plans for the future. When did you learn about his family's business?" "Not until we'd been together for almost a year. He told me his family was in import-export, which wasn't technically a lie." Paloma took a sip of coffee, buying herself time. By the time I understood what they really imported and exported, I was already in too deep. How deep? I was living in his house, working in his office. He said he loved me, that we were going to get married, have children. He made it sound like I was part of his family. "But you weren't." "No." The word came out bitter. "I was property, a useful tool who could type and file and smile at business associates, someone who could be trusted because I had nowhere else to go." Giancarlo leaned forward slightly. "What changed?" Paloma closed her eyes, remembering the night that had finally broken her. "He brought a man to the house, someone who owed the cartel money. Diego wanted me to watch while he made an example of him." She opened her eyes to find Giancarlo watching her intently, his expression unreadable. "I couldn't do it. I tried to leave the room, but Diego grabbed me, forced me to stay. He said I needed to understand what happened to people who betrayed the family, that I needed to see what would happen to me if I ever tried to leave." "But you did leave." 3 months later. I'd been planning it for weeks, saving money, creating false documents. I thought I'd covered my tracks, but... She touched her bandaged wrist unconsciously. "He found me 2 days before I was supposed to fly to Chicago." Giancarlo's jaw tightened. "He tied you up. For 18 hours, he wanted to know where I was planning to go, who was helping me, what I'd told anyone about the business. When I wouldn't answer, he got creative with his questioning methods. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic from the street below." Giancarlo stared into his coffee cup, his expression dark. "How did you escape?" "His phone rang, emergency at one of the warehouses. He left me tied up while he went to handle it, but he was careless with the knots. I managed to get free and ran." Paloma's voice dropped to a whisper. "I made it to the airport with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fake passport I'd bought months earlier. And you chose Chicago because it's big enough to disappear in, far enough from Mexico that Diego's reach would be limited, and because I'd heard the Italian families here don't get involved with cartel business." Giancarlo's mouth quirked up in what might have been amusement. "You heard wrong." Before Paloma could ask what he meant, her phone buzzed. She'd forgotten she even had it with her until that moment. The screen showed an unknown number, but somehow she knew exactly who was calling. "Don't answer it," Giancarlo said sharply. But it was too late. Paloma's finger had already swiped to accept the call, some masochistic part of her needing to hear Diego's voice to confirm her worst fears. "Palomita." Diego's voice purred through the speaker, the pet name making her skin crawl. "Did you miss me?" Giancarlo was beside her in an instant, taking the phone and putting it on speaker. His free hand rested on her shoulder, warm and surprisingly comforting. "I know you're there, mi amor. I know you're listening. Did you really think you could hide from me forever?" "How did you find me?" Paloma's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I have friends everywhere, baby, including Chicago. Imagine my surprise when I learned you were working for the Bianchi family. Such a small world, don't you think?" Giancarlo's grip on her shoulder tightened. "What do you want, Morales?" "Ah, Giancarlo Bianchi. I was wondering when you'd join our little conversation." Diego's voice carried amusement and something darker. "I want what belongs to me, my woman, my property." "She's not your anything," Giancarlo said, his voice deadly quiet. "Isn't she? Tell me, Bianchi, has she mentioned the little insurance policy she took when she ran? The files she copied? The names and numbers and bank account information that could destroy half my operation?" Paloma felt the blood drain from her face. She'd forgotten about the flash drive hidden in the lining of her purse, the one she'd created as a last resort in case Diego ever tried to kill her. "I thought not," Diego continued, clearly hearing her sharp intake of breath. "She's been keeping secrets from you, just like she kept secrets from me. The question is, what are you willing to pay to keep those secrets from falling into the wrong hands? The line went dead, leaving them in heavy silence. Giancarlo slowly set the phone down and turned to face Paloma, his dark eyes blazing with fury. "A flash drive," he said quietly. "You have a flash drive with cartel information and you didn't think to mention it?" "I forgot." "You forgot." His voice rose slightly. "You forgot that you're carrying around information that could start a war between my family and the Morales cartel." Paloma fumbled for her purse with shaking hands, pulling out the small leather bag she'd carried from Mexico. Her fingers found the hidden pocket in the lining, withdrawing a tiny flash drive that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I made it as insurance," she said, holding it out to him, "in case Diego ever tried to kill me. I thought if I had something he needed, something that could hurt him, he might let me go." Giancarlo took the drive, turning it over in his palm. Such a small thing to cause so much trouble. "What's on it?" "Everything. Client lists, money laundering routes, corrupt officials on the payroll, planned shipments for the next 6 months, enough to cripple their operation if it fell into the hands of law enforcement or rival cartels." Giancarlo closed his fist around the drive. "And now Diego knows I have it. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to disappear, to start over somewhere safe." "Safe?" Giancarlo laughed bitterly. "There's no such thing as safe in our world, Paloma. There's only power and the willingness to use it." He walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. "Diego will come for you, and when he does, he'll bring enough men to level this entire block if necessary. Then let me go. Give me the drive and let me disappear. You don't owe me anything." Giancarlo turned back to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "It's too late for that." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the moment I put my hands on Russo tonight, the moment I claimed you were under my protection, I made you mine, and I don't give up what's mine." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with promise and threat in equal measure. Paloma stared at him, trying to understand what he was really saying. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough." He crossed back to her, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I know you're brave enough to run from a man who could have you killed. I know you're smart enough to create insurance that could bring down a cartel. I know you're strong enough to survive 18 hours of torture without breaking." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "And I know that the moment I saw those bandages on your wrist, something inside me decided you belonged to me." Before Paloma could respond, the lights in the apartment went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the apartment in an eerie red glow. Giancarlo's hand moved from Paloma's cheek to his jacket, withdrawing a gun with practiced efficiency. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice calm despite the sudden darkness. "What's happening?" "Diego's making his move sooner than I expected." The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere below them, sharp cracks that made Paloma flinch. Giancarlo moved to the window, peering down at the street through a gap in the curtains. 3 cars, maybe 15 men. His voice was clinical, detached. "Professional setup." More gunfire, closer this time. Someone was fighting their way up through the restaurant. Paloma's heart hammered against her ribs as the reality of the situation hit her. Diego had found her, and now people were going to die because of her. "This is my fault," she whispered. "No." Giancarlo's voice was sharp. "This is Diego's fault for thinking he could take what's mine." The apartment door exploded inward, wood splintering as armed men poured through the opening. Giancarlo shoved Paloma behind the kitchen counter and opened fire, his shots precise and deadly. 2 men dropped immediately, but more kept coming. "Paloma!" Diego's voice carried over the gunfire, smooth and confident. "Come out, mi amor. Let's end this before more people have to die." Giancarlo reloaded with swift efficiency, his movements fluid despite the chaos around them. "How many rounds do you think I have left, Morales?" "Enough to kill a few more of my men, perhaps, but not enough to kill all of them." Diego stepped into view, using one of his own men as a human shield. "And certainly not enough to save your pretty little girlfriend when my patience runs out." Paloma could see Diego clearly now, for the first time in 3 weeks. He looked exactly the same, handsome in a cruel way, with dark hair and cold eyes that missed nothing. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year, and his smile was the same one that had once made her heart race with excitement instead of terror. "Hello, Palomita," he said, his gaze finding her behind the counter. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble. Let her go," Giancarlo said, his gun trained on Diego despite the human shield. "So your business is with me now?" "My business has always been with her. You're just an inconvenience." Diego's smile widened. "Though I admit I'm curious about what she's told you. Has she mentioned how she used to scream my name? How she begged me to—" Giancarlo's shot took off part of Diego's ear, the bullet passing so close to his head that it singed his hair. The human shield dropped, dead before he hit the ground. "The next one goes through your brain," Giancarlo said calmly. Diego touched his bleeding ear, his expression shifting from amusement to rage. "You just made a very expensive mistake, Bianchi." "Did I? Because from where I'm standing, you're the one bleeding." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Paloma counted at least 6 of Diego's men still standing, all with weapons trained on Giancarlo. Even if he was the best shot in Chicago, the odds were impossible. "I have a proposition," Diego said, pulling a white handkerchief from his pocket to press against his wounded ear. "A trade. The flash drive and the girl for safe passage out of your territory." "Counteroffer," Giancarlo replied. "You leave now, and I let you keep breathing." "You're not in a position to negotiate, Bianchi. My men have your restaurant surrounded. Your people are either dead or pinned down. It's over." Paloma closed her eyes, knowing what she had to do. She couldn't let Giancarlo die because of her mistakes. Slowly, she stood up from behind the counter. "Stop," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the apartment. "I'll come with you, Diego. Just let him live." "Paloma, no." Giancarlo's voice was sharp with command, but she was already moving. "It's over," she said, not looking at him. She couldn't bear to see the expression on his face. "You tried to help me, but this is my mess to clean up." She took a step toward Diego, then another. His smile returned, triumphant and cruel. "That's my good girl. I knew you'd see reason eventually." "I have conditions," Paloma said, stopping just out of Diego's reach. "You're hardly in a position to make demands." "Aren't I? You need me alive, Diego. You need the information in my head, and you need me compliant. Kill Giancarlo and you'll never get either." Diego's eyes narrowed. "What are you proposing?" "Safe passage for him and his men. Your word that the Bianchi family will be left alone. In exchange, I'll come with you willingly, and I'll give you everything you want to know about the flash drive." "And if I refuse?" Paloma pulled a small knife from the kitchen counter, pressing the blade to her own throat. "Then you get nothing." The room went dead silent. Diego's face cycled through several emotions: rage, calculation, and something that might have been respect. "You've grown some teeth, Palomita. I've learned from the best." Diego considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, safe passage for Bianchi and his people. But if I ever see him again, if he ever interferes in my business, the deal is void." "Agreed. Paloma." Giancarlo's voice was low, dangerous. "Don't do this." She finally turned to look at him, memorizing his face. The strong jaw, the dark eyes that had shown her more gentleness in one evening than she'd experienced in years, the wolf tattoo that somehow made him look both civilized and wild. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Before he could respond, she walked to Diego, keeping the knife at her throat until she was close enough for him to grab her wrist and twist the blade away. "Smart girl," he murmured, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Now let's go home." As Diego's men began to file out of the apartment, Paloma risked one last look at Giancarlo. He was standing perfectly still, his gun lowered, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his words meant for her alone. Diego laughed. "Yes, it is." But as they reached the door, Paloma heard Giancarlo speak again, his voice carrying a promise that made her shiver. "Nobody takes what's mine." The last thing she saw before Diego dragged her into the hallway was Giancarlo reaching for his phone, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was far from over. The private jet was luxurious in the way that only blood money could buy. Leather seats, crystal glasses, and enough armed guards to invade a small country. Paloma sat across from Diego, her wrists zip-tied to the armrests, watching him sip expensive whiskey as if he hadn't just orchestrated a small war in downtown Chicago. "You've been very quiet, Palomita," Diego said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Aren't you happy to be going home? This isn't my home anymore." "No? Then where is? That little apartment above Bianchi's restaurant? Playing house with a man who kills people for a living?" Paloma met his gaze steadily. "At least he never pretended to love me while he hurt me." Diego's smile faltered slightly. "I do love you. That's why I came for you. That's why I'm willing to forgive your little rebellion." "Forgive?" The word came out sharp with disbelief. "You tied me up for 18 hours. You threatened to kill me. I was angry. You betrayed me, stole from me, ran away like a thief in the night. What did you expect?" Before Paloma could answer, Diego's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. "Problema?" one of his men asked from across the aisle. "The warehouse in Guadalajara. Someone hit it an hour ago. Professional job, in and out, no witnesses left alive." Paloma's heart skipped a beat. It had been less than 4 hours since they'd left Chicago. There was no way Giancarlo could have organized a strike that quickly, unless... "How much did we lose?" Diego asked into the phone. The voice on the other end was rapid-fire Spanish, too fast for Paloma to follow completely, but she caught enough. 50 million in product. The entire month's inventory. Gone. Diego's face went white with rage. "Find out who did this. I want names, I want locations, and I want them dead by morning." He ended the call and turned to stare at Paloma with cold fury. "You wouldn't know anything about this, would you?" "How could I? I've been with you." "But your boyfriend might. Tell me, what exactly did you share with Giancarlo Bianchi during your little heart-to-heart?" Paloma's mind raced. She'd given Giancarlo the flash drive, which contained detailed information about Diego's operations, including warehouse locations and security protocols. But there was no way he could have acted on that information so quickly, unless he'd already been planning something. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Diego leaned forward, his eyes glittering with malice. "You know what I think? I think your Italian boyfriend is smarter than I gave him credit for. I think he's been planning to move against my operations for months, and you just gave him the tools to do it." The plane's intercom crackled to life. "Mr. Morales, we're receiving a priority communication from Chicago. The caller says it's urgent." Diego grabbed the phone from his armrest. "This is Morales." "Diego." Giancarlo's voice filled the cabin, calm and controlled despite the static. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Bianchi." Diego's voice was pure venom. "Enjoying the fireworks in Guadalajara?" "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm calling about Paloma. She's exactly where she belongs, with her family." "Her family?" Giancarlo's laugh was cold. "You mean the people who tie her up and terrorize her? That family. You don't know her like I do. You don't know what she's capable of. I know she's brave enough to sacrifice herself to save people she barely knows. I know she's strong enough to survive your abuse and still have enough compassion left to worry about my safety." Giancarlo's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "And I know she doesn't belong to you." Diego's grip tightened on the phone. "She's mine. She's always been mine. Was she yours when she ran? Was she yours when she chose to work for me instead of coming back to you? Was she yours when she put a knife to her own throat rather than let you hurt me?" Paloma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Even now, even after she'd left him to save his life, Giancarlo was fighting for her. "What do you want, Bianchi?" "A trade. Paloma for your warehouse." Diego laughed harshly. "You already took my warehouse. I took one warehouse. I know the locations of 17 others, thanks to the very detailed files Paloma provided. I also know your shipping schedules, your supplier contacts, and the account numbers for every bank you use to launder money." The cabin fell silent except for the hum of the jet engines. Diego's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Check your Cayman Islands account, the one ending in 7749. Diego grabbed his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. His face went from pale to gray as he stared at the screen. $50 million, Giancarlo continued conversationally. Gone. Transferred to various charities around the world. I particularly like the women's shelter in Mexico City. Very fitting, don't you think? You son of a bitch. I'm just getting started, Diego. Every hour you keep Paloma, I destroy another piece of your empire. Your choice how much you want to lose. Diego looked at Paloma with pure hatred. She's not worth this much trouble. To you, maybe. To me, she's worth everything. The words hit Paloma like a physical blow. She stared at the phone, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You barely know her, Diego snarled. I know enough. I know she deserves better than you. I know she deserves to be protected, not terrorized. And I know that I'm going to keep destroying everything you've built until you give her back to me. And if I refuse, then by tomorrow morning the Morales cartel will be nothing but a memory, and you'll be a dead man. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Diego stared at the phone for a long moment, then at Paloma, then back at the phone. You win this round, Bianchi, but this isn't over. Yes, Giancarlo said quietly. It is. 2 hours later, Paloma found herself standing on a private airstrip outside Chicago, watching Diego's plane disappear into the night sky. Giancarlo stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not quite touching. How? She asked finally. I've been watching the Morales operation for months, waiting for the right opportunity to move against them. When you gave me that flash drive, you gave me everything I needed. You used me. I protected you. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight she could see the intensity in his dark eyes. There's a difference. You destroyed his business. He'll never stop coming after me now. He'll never get the chance. Giancarlo's voice carried absolute certainty. Diego Morales is finished. His suppliers are dead. His money is gone, and his remaining men are already switching sides. He's no longer a threat to anyone. Paloma stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You killed him. I didn't have to. Men like Diego don't survive long once they lose their power. His own people will take care of him within the week. The casual way he said it should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that might have been relief. What happens now? She asked. Giancarlo stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, the same way he had in the restaurant. Now you decide what you want. What I want. You're free, Paloma. Really free for the first time in years. You can go anywhere, be anyone. Start any life you choose. She searched his face, looking for some hint of what he wanted her to say. And if I choose to stay? Then you stay. With me. As mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have sent her running. After years with Diego, she should have been terrified of any man who claimed ownership of her. But when Giancarlo said it, it didn't sound like a cage, it sounded like a promise. What does that mean exactly? Being yours? It means you're under my protection. It means no one hurts you ever again. It means you have a home, a family, a place where you belong. His thumb traced her cheekbone. It means I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid again. Paloma closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. I don't know how to not be afraid. Then I'll teach you. When she opened her eyes, Giancarlo was looking at her with such tenderness that it took her breath away. This dangerous man, this killer who had just destroyed an entire cartel to get her back, was looking at her like she was something precious. Who hurt you? She asked softly, echoing his words from the restaurant. Giancarlo's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. What? Someone hurt you too. I can see it in your eyes. Who was it? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his hand moved to the wolf tattoo on his neck, fingers tracing the ink. My brother, he said quietly. He was supposed to take over the family business, but he wanted out. Wanted a normal life, a wife, children. Our father saw it as weakness. What happened? A rival family used his desire for normalcy against him. They took his fiancée, tortured her, killed her, made him watch. Giancarlo's voice was steady, but Paloma could hear the pain underneath. He never recovered. Took his own life 6 months later. I'm sorry. I swore that day that I would never let emotion make me weak. Never let anyone get close enough to be used against me. His dark eyes met hers. And then I saw you, and everything changed. Paloma reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. I'm not going anywhere. Are you sure? Because once you're mine, Paloma, I don't let go. Ever. Good, she whispered. Because I don't want you to. Giancarlo's mouth came down on hers, and Paloma felt something inside her chest crack open. Not break, heal. For the first time in years, she felt safe, protected, cherished. When they finally broke apart, Giancarlo rested his forehead against hers. Welcome home, he said softly. And for the first time in her life, Paloma knew exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Paloma stood in the kitchen of the penthouse apartment that had become her sanctuary, watching Giancarlo read the morning paper while he drank his espresso. The wolf tattoo on his neck was visible above the collar of his white dress shirt, and she still felt a little thrill every time she saw it. The Morales cartel officially disbanded yesterday, he said without looking up from the financial section. The last of Diego's lieutenants was found dead in a Tijuana hotel room. Paloma nodded, feeling nothing but relief. The nightmares had finally stopped coming, and she could sleep through the night without jumping at every sound. Any regrets? Giancarlo asked, finally looking up at her. About Diego? No. She moved to stand behind his chair, her hands settling on his shoulders. About leaving my old life behind? Never. Even though your new life involves dating a man who's probably going to hell? Paloma laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. Probably, Giancarlo, you're definitely going to hell, but at least I'll have good company. He caught her hand and pulled her around to sit in his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist. I love you, he said simply. The words still had the power to make her heart race, not because she was afraid, but because she was happy. Genuinely, completely happy for the first time in her adult life. I love you too, she said, meaning every word. Marry me. Paloma blinked, certain she'd misheard. What? Marry me, Giancarlo repeated, his dark eyes serious. Be my wife. Officially, legally, permanently mine. Are you asking or telling? I'm asking, but I'm hoping you'll say yes, because I already bought the ring. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was the most beautiful ring Paloma had ever seen, a perfect solitaire diamond, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the kitchen walls. It's beautiful, she breathed. Is that a yes? Paloma looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, then at the life they'd built together. A life where she felt safe, valued, and loved beyond measure. A life where she could be herself without fear. Yes, she said, laughing as Giancarlo slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, yes, yes. As he kissed her, Paloma thought about the bandage that had started it all, the visible proof of her pain that had somehow led to her salvation. She'd thought it marked her as damaged goods, but Giancarlo had seen it differently. He'd seen it as evidence of her strength, her survival, her refusal to give up. Who hurt you? He'd asked that night in the restaurant. Now she knew the answer. Everyone who had come before him. But Giancarlo Bianchi had healed every wound, answered every prayer she'd been too afraid to voice, and given her a love she'd never dared to dream possible. She was his, completely and forever. And for the first time in her life, belonging to someone felt like freedom,